Hi, welcome back. So far in this course, we have talked about a range of different methods that are developed in statistics, in computer science, in artificial intelligence, in econometrics, methods that are generally used for data analysis and for summary of data or for causal analysis, etc. This week, I want to talk about two methods that are developed specifically within political science. And we're going to discuss them only very briefly, but I want to give you a little bit of an idea what kind of methods we have and what sort of the origins is of text analysis in political science. So in political science, we might have a whole range of different reasons why we want to do text analysis. So it's obvious that text is very prominent in politics, right? Politicians have debates, politicians give speeches, politicians write laws. So if you want to understand politics, analyzing text is a very important feature. And we can think of all kinds of text analysis that we might want to do within political science. We might want to find out what politicians talk about or when they talk about which kind of topics. This has to do with things like agenda setting or rhetorical strategies or trying to manage the media cycle, etc. So with all kinds of research questions, we might be interested in what politicians talk about. The second question might have to do with how they talk about these topics. Do they talk about them in a positive or a negative tone, with aggression or with joy, etc.? So we often want to talk about the sentiment, the style of talking. Perhaps you can think of applications that are a little bit less political sciencey, but that are interested in some other fields, like identifying authorship, like maybe some books written by politicians are really written by ghostwriters. Can we identify the ghostwriter using text analysis? And finally, we might want to think about categorizing documents, but this is really more a machine learning application, right? So we might be interested in identifying which emails are likely to be spammed. And one really important field in political science, and the field where text analysis were first introduced, has to do with the ideological position of political actors. So one thing we can do from looking at speeches by politicians or party manifestos they write, etc., is try to identify where they stand on an ideological spectrum. Are they more left-wing? Are they more right-wing? Are they for market liberalization or for nationalization, etc.? So we can look at the ideological positions of political parties, of other political actors, etc. And we can use different kinds of text documents or tweets or speeches, etc. To do so. So Grimmer and Stewart provide an article on text analytical methods in political science. It's already a few years old, and this is a very fast developing field. But it is a good read for you to get a little bit of a sense what is out there in political science. And this diagram really gives a sort of a summary of what they write about. So we've looked at classification methods, and we've looked at both known categories, which in machine learning would be named supervised methods, and unknown categories, which in machine learning is generally called unsupervised methods. Right, so we've talked about known categories. For example, we've looked at tree analysis, which would fit at the bottom left under individual methods. We've looked at random forests, which fits under ensembles there. But we've also looked at different kinds of classification where we do not know the categories. For example, cluster analysis. So cluster analysis would be under fully automated clustering. And then we've talked about single membership and mixed membership models, but we will talk more about that next week. And next week we will go at the very bottom. We end up with LDA. That's what we will discuss next week. Today I want to talk about this, aside from classification, this talk about ideological scaling, about positioning texts in an ideological space. And there are two main methods that have been developed in political science: Wordscores and Wordfish. Wordscores is actually developed in Trinity College in Ireland, and Wordfish is developed in the US. But the authors of, one of the authors of Wordfish also ended up working in Trinity. So Ireland has long been a bit of a hub in this area. Now there are already many existing attempts at coding ideological position. So this is just one new method of doing so, right? So people have been manually coding manifestos. There's the Comparative Manifesto Project, where lots of research assistants would have gone through many party manifestos and code each sentence in a number of categories and then try to identify whether parties are more left-wing, right-wing, etc. Other people have used voting behavior. We can look at the votes in Parliament over many years on a various range of laws and try to identify the ideological space in which legislators are placed. So just like we have a high dimensional data on many words used in many documents, we can also think of many legislators voting on many laws, yes or no. And then we get also a high dimensional space that we can use this kind of space reduction methods, a bit like the methods we discuss here, to look at underlying dimensions. There's expert surveys where just observers of politics have been asked who are more left-wing or who are more right-wing. We might look at voter perceptions and voting behavior, where we can see whether voters who are similar in their voting patterns might also have a similar ideological position. And then we can just ask voters, do you think you are left-wing? Do you think you're right-wing? Or we can ask parliamentarians, do you think you're left-wing or do you think you're right-wing? But the newest trend now, and which is closest to the first one, to the manual coding of manifestos, is to use automated coding of manifestos. And the two methods that have been developed are Wordscores and Wordfish. Both have been developed somewhat earlier this century. And the first one is in a way a supervised method, in the sense that we know the classification of some documents and then we classify other documents based on that first classification. And Wordfish, which is more like a latent variable model, we assume an underlying ideology and we model this statistically to find this dimension. So it looks a little bit, much more actually like PCA, which we discussed last week. So I will briefly discuss the two methods in the next two videos, but primarily focus on a few example applications. This will be a relatively short lecture, certainly compared to last week. Okay, I'll see you in a moment.